Well, first of all, let me begin by thanking John and Mary Manley again for their hospitality tonight for all of us. John, for your extraordinarily generous words about me. But equally, I have to say, even though maybe John, you chose for your own reasons not to mention your son Charlie, I want to bring him into the room tonight because so many of you knew Charlie. But I think Charlie's very much with us. And as he moved hearts when he was closer to what we can see and touch on a daily basis, I think he's continuing to move hearts through the two of you and in so many other ways. No child was luckier to have two parents who loved him unconditionally, and none of us who have had a chance to watch people parent are more gifted by the way in which you've parented him. So I want to thank you, John and Mary. I want to congratulate the co-chairs, Greg and James, and of course Shirley. I want to say, Carol, you nailed it, right? I mean, you killed it. And even though I was cautioned to avoid being too political, you weren't political. You said we should care about children. Since when did caring about children become political, right? I mean, I got a chance just to congratulate Carol briefly. I got a chance to say, we know this country we live in. We love it. We're here because we love it. I'm sure many of you have given many years of your lives to public service in it. And we know we fall short. We know we were founded on a premise and we fall short. And we know we've done it over and over again. But we ought to be better than this. We ought to be better than separating children from their parents. I mean, God, right? Ivo, I want to congratulate you on the fundraising success. If you say one more time that you've gone over the amount you needed to raise, I'll suggest that you send the overage to Special Olympics. We could use it. It's a global entity. It's very consistent on mission. Is there an application we can submit? But congratulations on this work. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it in a room like this, but I'm a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, but I'm dropping my membership effective immediately, and I'm going to join. I'm joining you guys. You seem to be much more on the ball, much younger, cooler, and everything else. I want to recognize that you are in a room with at least 3 people, maybe more, who were in Chicago in 1968 on July 20th on Soldier Field. But the one we need to remember and recognize and understand as the founding energy of that event is Justice Burke. Ann Burke, who's here with Ed. Ann. When people underestimate young people and they underestimate small amounts of money and they underestimate the entrepreneurial spirit, all you have to do is talk to Ann Burke and ask what it was like for her to be 25 years old and 26 years old, trying to move an entire city. And she got help. She got help from little Bill Daley's big dad, who was also pretty instrumental. So we thank the Daleys. Thank you, Bertie and Bill, for being here. And I'm, in my own way, just want to ask you all to join me in thanking one more person who doesn't, who has 5 children of her own and doesn't get to travel much, but even though she's a new grandmother, she came with me today, my wife, Linda Potter. We have our first grandson, yeah. So, I will just try very briefly to echo the words in my own way that John has just shared with you. 1968 was the year in which, by most counts, the population of people with intellectual disabilities who were put into institutions peaked in this country. It was the year in which the largest number of human beings in our history were sequestered behind very high concrete walls, often with barbed wire, often with minimal support, housing, food, I mean housing, food, nutrition, recreation, education, almost none of it behind those walls. And they were placed there not because of anything they'd done, but because of who they were. And they were placed there as young children, sometimes leaving neonatal wards. They were placed there as children diagnosed at 4 or 5 or 6 years old. And they were placed there sometimes as teenagers who were seen as being just too different, just too vulnerable, just too broken to belong. The old words echoed in those days: rid yourself of the child, he or she is too much. In that same year, a second premise took hold. And it was the premise that Anne and others brought to Soldier Field just a few miles from here. And it was the premise that if we play together, maybe we can recognize that everybody has a gift. And our job as a community, as a culture, as a family, as a church, whatever religious institution, our job is to create places where everybody's gift is welcomed. That there is no gift, there is no missing person without a gift. There is no vulnerability that warrants the exclusion, the labeling, the humiliation of a human being. There just is nothing that can explain that. There may be reasons why people use for it, but there's no justification that's adequate. On Soldier Field, people walked around on that field, and they saw people, many of them who had come from institutions, some of them traveling across state lines just to get here, to have a night in the hotel, to be able to march onto that stadium field to the 99,000 empty seats, with maybe 500 or 1,000 people there on the field. And on that field, people saw smiles that the world had never seen. They saw people run races in a way people had never seen. They saw parents proud in a way that they had never been. Many described having hugs given to them that they could never have imagined getting. Everybody went, it seemed, to those games because they wanted to help, because they thought, here are children who have this diagnosis, this label, this challenge, this problem, this enormous obstacle. Let me be the one who helps. And indeed they did. Eyes sparkled, new opportunities were born. If you could imagine, I sometimes do this is how I obsess over these things. I imagine myself sitting in the stands at Soldier Field, just as in one of 3 or 4 rows up on a bench all by myself and watching a 100-meter race run down in front of me and clapping and maybe seeing the runner come in third. You know, and maybe she's 12 years old and maybe she has Down syndrome and her arms are up in the air and she's cheering and she's getting a huge hug. And I can just imagine the transformative power of what Anne and others and Mayor Daley gave to the world on that first moment. Within a few months, outposts were started. People said, there's a pool here, we've got a gym here, how about our playing fields? We'll try this too. And within a few years, it wasn't just Michigan or Montana or Los Angeles or Los Alamos, it was France and Germany. We want to join. And then it was, as John pointed out, China and India. And then it was Syria and Egypt and Lebanon. And then it was Rwanda and Kenya and South Africa and Botswana and Brazil and Panama and El Salvador and Mexico. And all of a sudden, we've got 172 countries. And in 172 countries, there are over 100,000 children. Surely you would be so proud, and we're going to do more with this, at the age of 2 and 3 years old who are joining this movement. And there are over 100,000 schools where we are teaching children, not teaching children with intellectual differences, but teaching non-disabled children how to be inclusive, how to teach an inclusive mindset, what could be more important today. And we're also in all these places working with healthcare professionals, as John said. And so this energy, everybody has a gift energy, starts to move all over the world. But we started to notice on this path a new energy emerging. And it wasn't just the support energy, the energy of compassion. It was also the energy of the transformed lives of all the other people watching and coaching and playing and cheering. And it was as though all of a sudden our eyes were open, not just to the idea that service was a duty or an obligation or compassion or philanthropy, but that it was a way of life, that it was a practice, that in these moments we were all finding our own best selves, that we were discovering a purpose and a fulfillment that we could hardly imagine possible. And so hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people today, millions, volunteer for this experience. And I always remind them not just for those children, but for themselves, to refresh their belief in the human spirit, to remind them that there's no part of themselves that's too vulnerable to shine. To enter into a place where you can actually suspend disbelief for a few minutes and say, this is the place of no judgment. This is the place where every gift counts. This is a place where we celebrate your best, whatever it is. No one asks you for a ticket at the door, asks you to qualify, asks you to say, how high can you jump, how fast can you run? The question is, what's your best? Now run it, and put your arms up in the air when you're done. And in that environment, we find, at least for many of us, I dare say millions, a refreshed belief in the human spirit. Why is it relevant to us tonight in a room full of some of the smartest and most powerful and most learned folks on the global stage? In my view, because I believe the most dangerous weapon on earth today is attitudes of mass destruction. It is at its heart the attitude that some people are just too different to get along with. And when you let that attitude grow, there is nothing more dangerous. And so if you ask yourself, who can stop it? Who can teach the alternative? Who can model the circle of inclusion in which everybody has a chance? I would say it is not me. I dare say it is not most of us in this room. It is the athletes of Special Olympics. It is people who have lived on the margin or outside of it who can teach us how to erase the boundary that separates us from one another. It is people who have overcome the fear of difference who can show us how to have open arms when those of us who are a little bit vulnerable and a little bit scared and a little bit afraid of difference encounter it. The people that we celebrate tonight, as John said, he quoted me, but I'll remind you, you are giving me, and I'm very grateful for this award, but you are actually celebrating the tens of millions of mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, Special Olympics athletes, volunteers, donors, all those folks who in their own small way are doing a small thing, maybe, running that track meet. But by doing that small thing, they're pointing a big thing in the right direction. And that's really the challenge for each of us. However small our gift, to try to use it in a way that points us towards something bigger than ourselves and points us towards something, as we think of the global exigencies of our time, that gives us a chance to survive in some degree, with some degree of hope, that harmony and peace and justice, indeed, are the potential future that we would all share. So I want to thank you deeply on this 50th anniversary year as we pivot to a new type of Special Olympics, what we're calling an inclusion revolution, that everybody should join. Yeah, thank you. And on this 50th year, we will come back to Chicago. We're going to have a day of inclusion, a great concert, a lighting of an eternal flame down at Soldier Field, a unified World Cup. Everybody's watching the Russian World Cup. When you come to watch the Special Olympics, it will be unified sports. Half the athletes will have different abilities and half will not. And they will come from all over the world to play here. Play their version of sport, the version that says everybody has a chance. So we come back to Chicago again and again to thank Justice Burke, to thank all those volunteers, to thank Mayor Daley, to thank Charlie for continuing the energy and the passion and the hope, and for teaching us again and again and again that when we include, we have a chance to live a life worthy of the soul and spirit we share. We have the chance to rebuild the heart of this nation a heart that's wounded today, and a heart that's hurting and divided. But it can be united if we follow the right leaders, and I thank you for recognizing them here tonight. Thank you very much.